It started with silence, a kind of royal stillness that usually means something enormous is about to break. And then, out of nowhere, Buckingham Palace's official channel released a statement that left even the most seasoned royal reporters gasping for air. 2 minutes later, the entire internet was on fire. Lady Louise Mountbatten Windsor, it read, has formally accepted a new royal title granted by His Majesty King Charles III. A new title? The granddaughter of the late Queen Elizabeth II, long described as the quiet royal, the overlooked one, the invisible girl of Windsor, had just become something else entirely. A princess, and not just in name, but in purpose. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, Lady Louise seemed to live in the background of royal life. While her cousins Prince William and Prince Harry dominated headlines, and while Meghan Markle's controversies filled the tabloids, Louise remained the calm in the royal storm. A girl who never asked for fame, who preferred her horses to cameras and her books to banquets. And yet, here we are, a single signature from King Charles, and her destiny just flipped on its head. The world suddenly wants to know, why now? Why her? And what does this mean for the future of the monarchy? It's tempting to think this was a ceremonial move, a kind gesture from a loving grandfather. But that's not what insiders are whispering tonight. They say this decision carries weight, political, emotional, even strategic. Some call it the beginning of a new royal chapter. Others say it's a signal of a deeper family shift. Could it be that King Charles is quietly rewriting the royal script left behind by his mother? Or is he trying to correct a mistake the monarchy made decades ago? Picture the scene. Windsor Castle at dusk. The king in his private study, surrounded by letters written in his mother's delicate handwriting. Documents, sealed for years, stacked on his desk. And at the very top, one note that reads simply, "For Louise." Was this moment always meant to happen? Was it the Queen's final wish? The air around this revelation feels charged. This isn't just another title being handed down the royal line. This is a story of identity, redemption, and legacy. Lady Louise, once known to her classmates simply as Louise Windsor, is now at the center of a royal power shift that could reshape the next generation of the crown. But before we dive into what King Charles announced, let's rewind. Because understanding the meaning of this move means revisiting how Lady Louise became the royal family's best-kept secret. From birth, her story was complicated. Born prematurely in 2003, her arrival came with danger and uncertainty. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, nearly lost her life giving birth, and the Queen reportedly wept when she heard how close they came to tragedy. Louise's entrance into the world wasn't marked by grandeur. It was marked by survival. Maybe that's why, from the beginning, she carried an aura of quiet resilience. While her cousins were photographed at polo games and public appearances, Louise was protected, hidden even. Her parents chose a quieter upbringing, away from the tabloids. She didn't carry the title princess, even though she had the right to it. Prince Edward and Sophie wanted her to grow up like any ordinary girl, going to regular schools, having real friends, learning to live without cameras chasing her every move. It was a decision the Queen respected, but never forgot. Royal watchers now believe the Queen always saw something in Louise that reminded her of herself at that age. Introverted, intelligent, thoughtful, loyal. Over the years, the two grew incredibly close. During summers at Balmoral, they would go riding together, often without attendance. Louise would accompany her grandmother to church, quietly sitting beside her in the pew while other royals sought the spotlight. When Prince Philip died, it was Lady Louise who was seen driving his beloved carriage around the Windsor estate. That image, young Louise, calm and graceful, handling the horses with the same precision her grandfather loved, went viral for a reason. It wasn't just touching, it was symbolic. And maybe, in hindsight, it was prophetic. The monarchy is in a fragile place. King Charles's health has sparked concern. Prince Harry's scandals have divided the family. Prince Andrew's disgrace still casts a shadow. And Kate Middleton's recovery has forced the palace to rethink public appearances. In this moment of uncertainty, the crown needed stability, grace, and a reminder of the values that built its foundation. Enter Lady Louise. Royal insiders claim that for the past 2 years, Charles has been quietly preparing a new plan, a streamlined monarchy, focused on duty, not drama. But with fewer working royals, there's a vacuum forming. Who will carry the torch into the next generation? The king's move suggests he's found his answer. So what exactly happened behind those palace doors? How did a private young woman who never sought titles find herself being crowned the new Princess Louise of Edinburgh? Sources describe a small, private gathering earlier this week at Windsor Castle. No fanfare, no cameras, just the king, the queen consort, Prince Edward, and Sophie, with Lady Louise sitting quietly at the table. The king reportedly handed her a document sealed in crimson wax. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said softly. Louise opened it. Inside, a formal proclamation confirming her acceptance of a new royal title, one that had been kept on hold since Queen Elizabeth's passing. Imagine that moment. The shock, the emotion, the weight of legacy landing on your shoulders in an instant. Louise's response was modest, almost shy. But those in the room said her voice carried steady confidence. "If this helps the family," she said, "I accept." It's a line that now echoes through every corner of royal discourse. Because it wasn't just about inheritance, it was about responsibility. But here's where it gets intriguing. The timing. Why now? 2 years after the Queen's death. Why during a period of royal turbulence? Analysts suggest it's more than coincidence. The king, some say, is signaling that the next phase of monarchy will not be defined by celebrity or scandal, but by quiet strength. Lady Louise represents that. And yet, not everyone inside the palace is celebrating. Behind the gilded doors, this decision reportedly triggered debate. One senior aide allegedly questioned whether Louise wanted this at all. Another said it could cause tension among certain cousins, especially given Prince Harry's ongoing estrangement and Princess Beatrice's limited royal role. Some even claim Meghan Markle's inner circle privately expressed disdain online, calling the move desperate optics. Whether true or not, it adds fuel to an already roaring fire of speculation. Could this be the king's subtle message to the Sussexes? That titles are earned through grace, not self-promotion? That loyalty still matters more than celebrity? Many royal watchers think so. Still, there's something deeper here, something almost poetic. The monarchy has always been about reinvention. Every generation must redefine what the crown stands for. And in a world that's become cynical about royalty, Lady Louise's quiet dignity might be exactly what Britain needs. She's not controversial. She's not theatrical. She's genuine. And that authenticity might be the very quality the monarchy must cling to if it's going to survive another century. Now, think about the last time the palace surprised the world with a title change of this scale. It rarely happens without reason. Every royal move, especially under King Charles, carries hidden strategy. He's a man who thinks in legacies, not news cycles. The decision to elevate Lady Louise could signal preparation for something larger, a transition plan, perhaps. A royal reshuffling that the public hasn't yet been told about. And yet, even with the grandeur of this announcement, one detail in that official statement stood out. It didn't just name her new title. It referenced the continuation of duties envisioned by the late Queen. Duties, not privileges. That word choice matters. Because it suggests Lady Louise's new role isn't symbolic, it's active. And it links directly to something the Queen once confided to her granddaughter during a private Balmoral walk. One royal insider who overheard part of that conversation recalled the Queen saying, "The crown doesn't choose who shines. It simply reveals it." At the time, no one thought much of it. Now, it feels like a prophecy fulfilled. This story isn't just about a title. It's about the resurrection of an ideal, the quiet return of a kind of royalty that feels almost forgotten. The kind that doesn't chase cameras, but earns respect. As news spreads across social media, the reactions are telling. Hashtags like hashtag Princess Louise and hashtag the Queen would be proud have flooded timelines. People aren't mocking or criticizing, they're celebrating. In a sea of cynicism, the world seems united in one thought. This feels right. Still, the palace has been careful, painfully careful, not to release certain details. For example, there's mention of a sealed document connected to the Queen's personal will. There's talk that the king only recently gained permission to act on its contents. And there's the mystery of a royal diary said to include the Queen's handwritten thoughts about each of her grandchildren. Insiders claim that when Charles read it, he paused longest on the page about Louise. What did it say? No one outside the family knows for sure. But whispers suggest the queen described her as a soul of balance, a reflection of who we were before the crown grew heavy. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. For decades, the royal family has been criticized for excess, for detachment, for losing touch. Now, they've chosen as their new face a young woman who represents simplicity, modesty, and warmth. It's as if the monarchy is trying to heal itself through her. So where does that leave the rest of the royal lineup? Will this spark envy, tension, or quiet support? The next chapters of this story will reveal just how deep those palace divides run. Because while this announcement feels celebratory on the surface, not everyone standing behind those palace windows is smiling. Behind the grandeur, there's a sense that this decision might have reopened old wounds between Charles and Anne, between Edward and the late Queen's advisors, even between the generations themselves. Some say this moment has stirred a truth that's been kept under wraps for years, a secret about why Lady Louise's destiny was delayed in the first place. And if that's true, what we've seen today is only the beginning. Because while the cameras show us a family smiling on the palace balcony, something entirely different might be unfolding behind those velvet curtains. A quiet struggle for legacy, identity, and the soul of the crown itself. Lady Louise's new title may have made her a princess, but the story behind it could shake the very foundations of royal history. And what King Charles revealed in that sealed letter, it wasn't just a title. It was a promise, one that connects directly to the Queen's dying wish. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began with an unexpected sound, the sharp, echoing chime of Buckingham Palace's internal alert system, the same one used for urgent press bulletins. Staff froze. Phones buzzed across newsrooms. Within seconds, royal correspondents, some half asleep in their London flats, jolted awake to the message flashing across encrypted media channels. Buckingham Palace to issue statement at 12 o'clock midnight. No further context. No warning. Just that one line. And in the royal world, silence before an announcement never means something small. At precisely 12, the palace website refreshed. The crest appeared. The air in every newsroom turned to static. Then, the statement appeared, short, deliberate, explosive. His Majesty King Charles III has conferred upon Lady Louise Mountbatten Windsor a new royal title, in accordance with the wishes of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Henceforth, Lady Louise shall be styled Her Royal Highness Princess Louise of Edinburgh. It was the phrasing that sent shivers through Britain. Her Royal Highness. Not honorary. Not symbolic. Formal. Permanent. The Queen's granddaughter had officially stepped into the same tier of royalty once reserved for the highest heirs. Overnight, a quiet 21-year-old university student had been elevated to one of the most powerful symbolic roles in the monarchy. For decades, the Edinburgh title carried profound significance. It belonged first to Prince Philip, the late Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's strength and stay, her lifelong partner. When he passed in 2021, the dukedom transferred temporarily to Prince Edward, Louise's father. But there had always been whispers that the Queen wanted the Edinburgh legacy to continue through the next generation. Few imagined it would skip directly to Louise herself. Royal commentators erupted. One veteran reporter tweeted, "This changes everything. The king is rebalancing the line of influence within the family." Another said, "This move positions Lady Louise as the new face of royal continuity." It's a masterstroke. But inside the palace, it wasn't celebration, it was confusion. Not everyone knew this was coming. Sources say several senior courtiers, including those managing the king's communications, were caught off guard. It was handled like a military operation, one insider confessed. Only 3 people in the king's immediate circle knew it was happening: the king, the queen consort, and the private secretary. Even Prince Edward was only told hours before the release. That secrecy speaks volumes. King Charles is meticulous. He rarely acts on impulse. If he kept this under wraps, it wasn't to surprise the world, it was to control it. Moments after the statement went live, phones at the palace reportedly lit up like a Christmas tree. Senior advisors scrambled to craft press lines, royal biographers began rewriting chapters, and even some family members, princess and among them, called for immediate clarification. The king, however, had gone offline. One courtier described it perfectly. It felt like a thunderclap in a cathedral. You could feel the echoes before you even processed the sound. Why was this such a shock? Because for years, Lady Louise's parents had insisted she remain untitled. They wanted her to experience life as a private citizen. The late Queen agreed to that at the time, believing the decision could be revisited when Louise came of age. And now, that moment had arrived, quietly, decisively, and under King Charles's authority. But here's where the story deepens. Royal experts began piecing together a timeline. Weeks before the announcement, Louise had been seen visiting Buckingham Palace under the radar. She wasn't attending official meetings. She was entering through staff entrances, sometimes carrying folders. One source close to the household staff recalled seeing her in conversation with the king's private secretary in a secluded courtyard. She looked composed, the source said. Not nervous, just resolved. Could it be that Louise herself initiated this process? That she didn't just receive the title, but actively accepted a role? The palace has yet to confirm who approached whom. But one fact is clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment favor. This was coordinated, structured, timed perfectly. And the timing matters. Just a week prior, Meghan Markle's public appearance at a Los Angeles charity gala had reignited debate over royal titles. Her speech, laced with pointed remarks about earning recognition, drew criticism and renewed tension between the Sussexes and Buckingham Palace. Now, suddenly, King Charles's move to honor his niece felt like a subtle but deliberate counterpoint. A quiet royal act overshadowing a loud celebrity statement. Coincidence? Unlikely. The British public reacted instantly. Social media split into two camps, those praising the king's decision as a dignified revival of tradition, and those accusing him of favoritism. She's the only one who never sought fame, wrote one commenter. If anyone deserves it, it's her. Others questioned whether this was an attempt to repair public trust after recent royal controversies. Either way, the move had achieved something extraordinary. It had people talking about the monarchy with renewed fascination. Yet, amid the celebration, there were whispers of discomfort from within. Reports surfaced that Prince Edward looked visibly uneasy during a private family dinner the next evening. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, was seen comforting him. They had raised their daughter to value anonymity, and now that anonymity was gone forever. Still, those who know the king say this decision wasn't made out of emotion, but design. Charles understands symbols. In the monarchy, perception is power. By elevating Lady Louise, he wasn't just honoring a granddaughter. He was making a statement to the world. The future of the crown lies in integrity, not spectacle. Let's pause and think about that. Throughout history, every monarch has had to choose who represents their vision of royalty. For Queen Victoria, it was the heirs who projected strength. For Elizabeth II, it was those who embodied duty. For Charles, it seems to be those who reflect humility. And in a family long accused of elitism, humility is a radical act. So, what did that midnight announcement really mean? Beyond the titles, beyond the headlines, it meant that a once-forgotten granddaughter had just been thrust into the royal spotlight, not because of bloodline hierarchy, but because of character. It was a moral promotion as much as a royal one. But as dawn broke the next morning, journalists digging deeper began to uncover something even more fascinating. The press release had been time-stamped 12:02 a.m., but the king's personal signature on the document bore a different date. The ink had dried 2 days earlier. Why delay the release? Some speculate it was to coincide with a private anniversary known only to the royal family. Others believe it was tied to the date of an unpublicized visit Charles made to Windsor Chapel, where, sources claim, he spent hours alone in prayer. Was he seeking guidance before making the move his mother had once contemplated? If that's true, the symbolism grows even richer. The Queen's influence, even in death, still shaping the monarchy through her son's hands. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, an internal memo circulated quietly to staff. It instructed courtiers to address Lady Louise as Her Royal Highness Princess Louise, in all internal correspondence effective immediately. The tone of the memo was formal, but the footnote caught attention, by direct order of His Majesty, per familial and personal reasoning. Familial and personal. Two words that suggest this was not merely royal duty, it was emotional closure. But there's another layer. Buried within the same communication was a mention of continuation of the Edinburgh responsibilities. For those who understand royal semantics, that phrase refers to one of the late Duke's lifelong causes, his commitment to environmental education and youth leadership. It raises a tantalizing possibility. Is Lady Louise set to inherit her grandfather's philanthropic mantle, not just his title? Imagine the symbolism, a granddaughter taking up the Duke's mission, ensuring that his name and purpose endure. It's poetic, it's strategic, and it would explain why this transition was handled so quietly. Still, questions linger. Was there resistance from other branches of the family? One royal aide confided to a journalist that some didn't take the news well. Another source said bluntly, "Not everyone believes Louise is ready for what comes next." Whether those voices belong to Princess and Prince William or others, no one will say. But tension was clearly in the air. As the media frenzy built, Buckingham Palace did what it always does, closed ranks. No further comment. No interviews. The official statement stood on its own, polished and final. But insiders hint that behind those stone walls, a much deeper conversation had taken place. Apparently, hours before the announcement went public, the king summoned a small group of advisors to his private library. There, surrounded by portraits of his ancestors, he reportedly said something that silenced the room. "The monarchy must not lose its heart," he declared. "My mother saw it in Louise. So will I." Those who were there describe it as one of the most emotional statements the king has made since his coronation. It wasn't policy. It was legacy. By the next morning, news outlets from Sydney to Toronto ran the same headline. "A new princess for a new era." The phrase caught on instantly. British morning shows replayed old footage of Lady Louise driving Prince Philip's carriage. Newspapers printed side-by-side photos of her and the young Queen Elizabeth. The resemblance was uncanny. Public opinion began to shift from curiosity to admiration. Still, royal watchers couldn't ignore the subtext. Every major royal move casts a shadow, and this one's shadow loomed long. Would this elevation upset the delicate balance among the next generation of royals? How would William, as heir to the throne, view this sudden addition to the royal hierarchy? Was Charles consolidating loyalty in the younger generation by lifting someone untouched by scandal? Theories multiplied, but one thing became undeniable. This announcement had restored something intangible to the monarchy: mystery. And mystery, in a world saturated with noise, is power. Even in the palace's marble corridors, the mood felt electric. Staff whispered in hallways. Portraits of past monarchs seemed to watch silently, as if history itself approved. "It's like a ghost moved through the building," one attendant remarked. "A gentle one, but powerful." And yet, the most haunting detail of all came from a royal photographer who happened to be on duty that night. He claimed that minutes before the public statement dropped, a light flickered on in the window of the king's private office. The silhouette visible inside, he swore, wasn't Charles. It was Lady Louise herself, standing beside him, head slightly bowed. If true, it means she was there when the decision went live. Think about that. A young woman once hidden from view, standing in the room where royal history is written. It's almost cinematic. By midday, the Royal Communications Office quietly confirmed one additional fact. The king would host a private family dinner that evening to mark the occasion. No photographers, no press, just family. That's when the whispers of tension began again. Because someone, according to multiple leaks, refused to attend. Who? We'll get there. But for now, as the palace walls hummed with new purpose and the world debated the meaning of this royal resurrection, one thing was crystal clear. This announcement was only the first move in a much larger game. King Charles had made his choice. Lady Louise was no longer the quiet royal. She was the monarchy's newest beacon. But the question that now hung over Windsor Castle was one no one dared ask aloud. Why did he really choose her? Because behind that midnight proclamation lay a promise the king made to his mother before she died. And once the world learns what that promise entailed, it will understand why this decision could reshape royal history forever. But what came next would pull the curtain back on a family secret so long buried. It nearly tore the crown apart. She was never meant to be famous. That's what her parents swore from the very beginning. While her cousins were photographed at polo matches, standing beside the queen at balcony appearances, or splashed across glossy covers before they could even walk. Lady Louise Windsor grew up in near anonymity. No blinding flashes. No paparazzi waiting at her school gates. For the longest time, many in Britain couldn't even pick her out of a lineup of royal children. And yet, within those quiet years, something powerful was taking shape, a character molded by restraint, compassion, and the kind of old-fashioned grace that can't be taught, only inherited. It all began with her entrance into the world, one that almost didn't happen. In November 2003, when Sophie, Countess of Wessex, went into premature labor, chaos erupted. Doctors at Frimley Park Hospital rushed to save both mother and child. The Queen, upon hearing the news, reportedly prayed in silence at Windsor Chapel. Lady Louise was born small, fragile, and with complications affecting her eyesight. For weeks, her condition was uncertain. But from that very moment, she fought, quietly, without complaint. That spirit of quiet resilience would define her life. When she was finally brought home, the Queen visited personally. Witnesses say Her Majesty arrived not as a monarch, but as a grandmother, carrying flowers, wrapped in a headscarf, walking slowly up the drive. She held baby Louise, smiled, and said softly, "She's strong, stronger than she knows." No one could have predicted how prophetic that moment would be. From the earliest days, her parents made a choice that set her apart from her royal cousins. They declined the use of the HRH title, not out of rebellion, but out of wisdom. Prince Edward and Sophie wanted their children to have something rare in royal life: normalcy. "We're bringing them up with the understanding that they're very likely to have to work for a living," Sophie once said in a rare interview. "Hence, we made the decision not to use titles." And so, Lady Louise grew up like any ordinary British girl, attending a local school, taking riding lessons, and walking her dogs without security cameras tracking her every move. But beneath that normal facade, her upbringing was steeped in subtle royal training. When the family visited Sandringham or Balmoral, Louise observed how her grandmother interacted with guests, how she carried herself during church services, how she listened more than she spoke. These were unspoken lessons, the kind of education that prepares someone not just for leadership, but for legacy. There was an innocence about her, yet also an intelligence that startled those who met her. Tutors at her school described her as curious, well-mannered, and quietly brilliant. She loved literature, especially Shakespeare. And like her grandfather Prince Philip, she adored the outdoors: horseback riding, carriage driving, and long walks where she could disappear from the weight of royal expectation. While most teenagers might have been obsessed with social media, Louise was fascinated by history. One classmate recalled, "She once said she liked that history never lies. It just waits for people to pay attention." It's almost eerie, considering how her own history was quietly being written behind the palace gates. The Queen often invited her to Balmoral for the summer months. There, away from the public, Louise flourished. She would spend hours sketching landscapes, feeding the horses, or listening to her grandmother tell stories about royal life in the 1950s, when duty was heavy, but the world still believed in fairy tales. Louise absorbed everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't brag. She listened. And that, in a family full of voices, made her rare. It wasn't long before the Queen began confiding in her. Perhaps because Louise had no agenda, no ambition for power. One former staff member said, "The Queen felt safe with her. She saw in Louise a mirror of herself when she was young, observant, modest, and quietly determined." It said that the Queen even allowed Louise to read certain private letters, family correspondences that most royals never touch. Not for gossip, but for understanding. Her Majesty wanted her to know where the family came from, said one aide. She believed Louise would need that knowledge one day. And yet, through all of this, the world barely noticed her. In a family where fame often overshadows virtue, Louise's invisibility became her greatest shield. While other royals struggled under the spotlight, she learned the art of being present without being seen. That balance, of humility and grace, would later make her the perfect candidate for what King Charles had in mind. There were glimpses, though small, fleeting moments when the world caught sight of who she truly was. The first came during the funeral of Prince Philip. Cameras captured a young woman, poised and dignified, holding her composure while driving her grandfather's carriage. It was a haunting image. The horses, trained by Philip himself, moved as if they knew they were carrying his memory. And at the reins sat Lady Louise, focused, graceful, and heartbreakingly composed. That single image spread across the world. Suddenly, people asked, "Who is she?" But even then, she refused interviews. No statements. No social media posts. Silence. Just quiet service. Her parents, Prince Edward and Sophie, had always walked a delicate line, balancing royal duty with personal privacy. Their marriage, though low profile, was one of the strongest in the family. Sophie, in particular, played a crucial role in shaping Louise's sense of purpose. Insiders say Sophie instilled in her daughter an understanding that nobility means more than titles. It means character. And when Sophie once told reporters that her daughter might not use her royal style even when offered, no one could predict how that decision would resurface years later, when Lady Louise finally accepted a title, not for prestige, but for duty. Growing up, Louise's world was remarkably grounded. She did her own homework. She attended Girl Guides. She volunteered for equestrian charities. Her friends were not aristocrats, but regular students, many of whom didn't even realize her royal connection until they visited her home and noticed the framed portraits on the walls. She never bragged, one former classmate said. If anything, she avoided talking about her family altogether. But inside her, something was changing. When the Queen passed away in 2022, it hit her harder than most realized. During the funeral, while cameras focused on the new king and the Prince of Wales, some noticed Louise standing quietly beside her mother, tears glistening in her eyes. A royal photographer later revealed that when the cortege left Westminster Abbey, Louise turned briefly toward the coffin and whispered something no one could hear. Later, she confided to a family friend that she had said, "Thank you for teaching me how to listen." That line spread among the palace staff. They said it captured exactly who she was: humble, loyal, and sincere. But it also marked the beginning of her transformation. After the Queen's death, Louise withdrew further from public life, focusing on her studies at St. Andrews University. She studied English literature, fitting for a young woman whose life reads like a novel, and occasionally attended royal events at her parents' side. But something about her presence had changed. She carried herself differently. She was still quiet, but her silence had depth, purpose. It's believed that around this time, King Charles began to take special notice. During a family lunch at Windsor, he reportedly pulled her aside and asked how she was coping. Her answer, simple but profound, stayed with him. "I'm fine," she said. "I just hope I make her proud." Those words would later echo in his mind when he signed her new royal patent. But the most extraordinary part of Louise's hidden upbringing wasn't what the public saw. It was what they didn't. Unbeknownst to many, she had quietly begun taking part in small-scale royal duties long before her official title. She would attend unpublicized events, visit schools for visually impaired children, and assist at environmental charities inspired by her grandfather's legacy. No press, no headlines, just quiet action. It's said that at one of these events, a child asked her what it was like to be almost a princess. Louise smiled and said, "Being royal isn't about crowns. It's about care." The king reportedly heard about this exchange and told aides, "That's the monarchy's future, right there." So perhaps it was never about hiding her at all. Perhaps the Queen, Prince Philip, and her parents were quietly training her all along, protecting her from the noise of the world until she was ready to emerge not as a headline, but as hope. Still, the irony remains. In a family obsessed with visibility, it was the hidden one who embodied what the crown needed most. While Meghan sought microphones and Harry chased cameras, Lady Louise sought peace. And that contrast did not go unnoticed within the palace walls. Some insiders whisper that Lady Louise's humility made other royals uncomfortable. She didn't need attention to feel valuable, and that kind of quiet confidence can be disarming. During a family event, one royal reportedly joked, "We'll have to get her on Netflix next." Louise laughed it off, but the comment stung. Those around her say she took it as confirmation of why she preferred to stay out of the spotlight. But fate has a way of pulling the quiet ones forward. By the time King Charles ascended to the throne, he had begun to see her as something the monarchy desperately lacked: a figure of quiet credibility. In meetings with his advisors, he often mentioned the younger generation as the future of royal continuity. But it was Louise's name that kept resurfacing. One aide even claimed that Charles told his staff, "She reminds me of what we used to be." That's why, when the moment came to elevate her title, he didn't hesitate. The groundwork had been laid years earlier. Through every lesson the Queen taught her, every quiet act of service she performed, every time she chose duty over attention. And yet, there's a part of this story few outside the palace know. A hidden chapter in Lady Louise's early years that may explain why the Queen's affection for her ran so deep. It involves a promise, whispered between grandmother and granddaughter, one summer evening at Balmoral, just months before Prince Philip passed away. The Queen had been in a reflective mood, speaking about the weight of the crown, the loneliness of leadership, and the importance of family. Louise, just 17 at the time, listened intently. The Queen placed a hand on hers and said, "One day, you'll understand why silence can be stronger than speech." No one knows what Louise replied, but the Queen's diary entry from that night contained a curious note. Louise sees beyond the veil. Some have speculated it referred to her emotional intelligence. Others believe it hinted at something more. Perhaps the Queen foresaw her role in bridging the future and the past. Whatever the meaning, that bond shaped the woman Louise would become. It's the reason the Queen left behind a sealed letter addressed to King Charles, reportedly expressing her wish that Louise be recognized when the time was right. That time, it seems, is now. For nearly 2 decades, Lady Louise Mountbatten Windsor lived as a royal ghost, present, yet unseen. But ghosts, when they finally appear, tend to reveal truths long buried. And as her new title was unveiled to the world, the hidden Princess of Windsor stepped into the light, not because she sought it, but because destiny demanded it. Yet even as she stood poised to embrace her new role, one question haunted her. Why now? Why, after years of being shielded, was she suddenly being thrust into the spotlight her parents once feared? She would soon discover the answer didn't lie with her father, or even her mother. It lay within a promise the king made to the Queen before her death, a promise that would soon tear open old family wounds. Because when Charles read the Queen's private note to him about Louise, what he found wasn't just a blessing, it was a directive. And what came next would prove that Lady Louise's hidden upbringing wasn't protection, it was preparation. The wind that swept across Balmoral that September day carried an uncanny stillness, one that only those closest to the Queen understood. The world outside still believed she was resting. But inside those stone walls, in her private study overlooking the hills of Deeside, the late Queen Elizabeth II was quietly putting her affairs in order. Letters were being signed, family matters documented, and secrets, long kept, were being entrusted to those she knew would understand them best. Among those secrets was one name written in her delicate cursive on cream stationery, Louise. That single name, written without title or embellishment, was deliberate. It wasn't Lady Louise. It wasn't Louise Windsor. Just Louise. Because to the Queen, she wasn't merely a granddaughter. She was the one she'd chosen to carry something forward, something that would outlive crowns and titles. In her final months, the Queen had grown reflective. She often spoke about time, the irony of ruling across 7 decades, and yet feeling like the years had passed in a blink. Those who visited her at Balmoral recall that she was more open than ever, as if unburdening her soul before the curtain fell. And in those private moments, Lady Louise was one of the few people she asked to see, alone. They met several times in the weeks before her death. No cameras, no aides, just a grandmother and granddaughter walking along the river, talking softly as the Scottish sky shifted from gold to gray. Witnesses, mostly staff tending to the grounds, would see them together and quietly step aside. Her Majesty's face softened around Louise, one Balmoral servant later said. It was like she could finally be herself. But what did they talk about in those final meetings? That's the mystery historians are still trying to piece together. According to one handwritten memo found later in the Queen's Balmoral desk, she had been revising certain personal directives that were never meant for Parliament or government. These were family matters, deeply private, often emotional, and sealed in the royal archives. Among them was a document marked Private Legacy, for the eyes of the sovereign and his successor. It's believed that this file contained instructions not only for King Charles, but also for how the family should honor specific individuals after her passing. One of those individuals was Lady Louise. Why? Because to the Queen, Louise represented something the monarchy was losing: purity of intent. In her diary entry dated August 12, 2022, only weeks before she died, she wrote, "Louise possesses the calm of duty without demand. She reminds me of myself before destiny found me. She will not seek the crown, yet she will uphold it." Those words alone carry weight. They suggest that even as her life was fading, the Queen had identified the one member of the next generation who embodied her essence. Not the heirs in line for the throne, but the quiet spirit she saw in herself as a young woman suddenly burdened with power. There's another piece to this story, a moment that even now gives royal staff chills. 2 days before her passing, the Queen reportedly summoned her private secretary, Sir Edward Young, and asked that a sealed letter be placed among her final documents. "When the time comes," she said, "this is for Charles." She didn't explain its contents. She only added, "He'll know when to open it." After her death, that letter was delivered to Buckingham Palace along with the state papers and the late Queen's red boxes. It sat unopened in a locked drawer in the King's study for nearly a year. And when it was finally read, it changed the course of one young woman's life forever. But before that fateful reading, let's go back to the summer of 2021, the year before the Queen's death. That was when her relationship with Louise deepened in ways few knew. Prince Philip had just passed away, and the Queen was grieving in silence. Family members took turns visiting her at Windsor, but it was Lady Louise who stayed the longest. The two would have tea in the afternoons, sitting by the window overlooking the castle gardens. Staff recall hearing laughter, soft, genuine, a rare sound in those heavy days. Louise often spoke about her university dreams, her love for literature, and how much she missed her grandfather's carriage rides. It was during one of those visits that the Queen confided something extraordinary. She told Louise about her own youth, the loneliness of becoming queen at 25, the crushing responsibility, the way the crown can isolate even as it exalts. She told her, "You must always remember, my dear, the crown is not inherited, it's surrendered. We give ourselves to it, and in doing so, we lose something of our own." Louise listened quietly, her eyes wide. "But you never seem to lose yourself," she said. The Queen smiled faintly. But that's the secret. I lost Elizabeth long ago, but I gained a nation." That conversation struck a chord with Louise. She later wrote in her own journal, "Yes, she keeps one, a habit her grandmother encouraged. Duty can be a kind of love." Those 6 words would later be repeated by King Charles in his speech after granting her new title. Few realized he was quoting her. As months passed, the Queen's health declined. Yet, even as her strength waned, her clarity of purpose remained sharp. She began reviewing family documents, updating private trusts, and ensuring that her legacy was distributed not only in wealth but in wisdom. She reportedly told her chaplain, "My greatest fear is not death, it's leaving things unfinished." Among those unfinished matters was the question of titles for her grandchildren. Specifically, whether the children of the Earl and Countess of Wessex should be given their rightful HRH styles. She had long intended to revisit the decision once they reached adulthood, but it wasn't until her final months that she made her stance clear. "When the time is right," she wrote in her private memorandum, "Louise shall be recognized as she was born to be, a princess by blood and by spirit." She left it unsigned, sealed with her personal crest, and placed in the box marked "Personal Wishes, private to the sovereign." No one else knew, not even Prince Edward. When the Queen passed away in September 2022, the palace was consumed by protocol. There was no time for private revelations. The nation mourned, the crown transferred, and King Charles began his reign under immense pressure. But as he sifted through his mother's personal notes, one envelope caught his eye. It was addressed in her unmistakable handwriting, "To my dear Charles, for when you doubt." Inside was a folded letter, handwritten in blue ink. It began tenderly, "My dearest son, you carry a heavier burden than even I did. I trust you will do what you feel is right, not what the world demands." Then came a paragraph that would later alter Lady Louise's destiny. "Remember Louise. She has her grandfather's heart and your patience when you were young. She does not yet see it, but she will restore faith where it has waned. When the time comes, do not hesitate." When Charles read those lines, he reportedly fell silent for several minutes. One aide described it, as a moment frozen in time. The king closed the letter, looked out the window toward the palace gardens, and said quietly, "So that's why." But what exactly did he mean? Some believe it was the moment he decided to fulfill his mother's wish and grant Louise the royal recognition she had long deferred. Others think it went deeper, that he saw in Louise the solution to a problem the monarchy had struggled with for decades: public trust. In a world weary of royal drama, where every misstep becomes a headline, Lady Louise embodied something the late Queen had always cherished: duty without display. And Charles knew that image could heal the institution she left behind. The Queen's promise, however, wasn't merely symbolic. There's evidence it included tangible instructions. According to a senior archivist who helped organize the Queen's Balmoral files, one sealed envelope labeled "to be delivered upon restoration" contained a secondary note referring to the Edinburgh legacy. It's believed this note outlined her wish that the Edinburgh title, once held by her beloved Philip, eventually be passed to someone who would embody his principles. That someone, we now know, was Louise. So when the king signed the proclamation naming her Princess Louise of Edinburgh, he wasn't acting out of sentimentality. He was completing his mother's final act. Still, the promise carried an emotional weight that few could comprehend. For the Queen, this was about more than titles or family dynamics. It was about redemption. She had watched the monarchy stumble through crises, from Diana's tragedy to Meghan and Harry's rebellion. She'd seen public faith falter. Perhaps in her final vision, she believed a return to humility through someone like Louise could restore what had been lost. And so, she made a promise not only to her granddaughter but to her crown, that when the moment came, the monarchy would remember what it means to serve quietly, without fanfare. When Charles finally fulfilled that wish, he wasn't just honoring his mother's words. He was enacting her prophecy. Because in naming Lady Louise as Princess of Edinburgh, he wasn't expanding the monarchy, he was refining it. Yet, even as the ink dried on that royal decree, whispers spread through the family. Not everyone approved. Some believed the Queen's instructions had been misinterpreted. Others feared the move would reignite tensions with Harry and Meghan. But the king held firm. "This is not politics," he told aides. "It's promise." That word, promise, kept resurfacing. A promise that began in the quiet hills of Balmoral, beneath the gray Scottish sky, when a dying queen confided her final wish to the granddaughter who reminded her most of herself. But there's one detail the palace never released, one that adds another layer to this story. Alongside the letter addressed to Charles, archivists found a small sealed envelope addressed simply to Louise. It has never been opened publicly. Only the king and Lady Louise know what it contains. Some say it's a personal note of love. Others believe it holds the Queen's final request, something yet to be revealed. Whatever it is, the contents of that envelope may still shape what happens next. Because the Queen's promise didn't end with her death, it began there. And as King Charles honored his mother's wish, one question haunted him. Would fulfilling her promise bring the family closer together, or uncover the very secret she spent her life protecting? The answer would soon emerge in the next royal gathering at Balmoral, where truth, emotion, and decades of unspoken rivalry would finally collide. But what came next would shake the royal household to its core and force Lady Louise to make the hardest choice of her life. Every royal decision carries two meanings, the one written in the public statement and the one whispered behind palace walls. The midnight announcement of Lady Louise's new title was no exception. On the surface, it looked like an act of love, a grandfather fulfilling his mother's dying wish. But those who know King Charles understand something deeper. Nothing he does is ever purely sentimental. His gestures always carry strategy, timing, and long-game vision. The move to elevate Lady Louise was not just an inheritance of promise. It was a chess move in a game he's been playing since the day he ascended the throne. From the moment he became king, Charles has been fighting two wars, one public, one private. The public war is the one everyone sees, the struggle to modernize the monarchy in a world that questions its very existence. The private war, however, is far more personal, maintaining control of a fractured family while cementing a legacy that won't collapse under scandal, celebrity, or generational rebellion. Lady Louise, quietly, became the center of both. Insiders say Charles's advisors had been pressing him for months to find a unifying symbol, someone younger than William but less controversial than Harry, who could quietly bridge the royal divide. It couldn't be a PR stunt. It couldn't be performative. The public is smarter now, more cynical. The person had to be authentic, the kind of royal who didn't chase cameras or controversy. For a long time, that person didn't exist. Until now, Louise had something no one else in the family did: credibility without baggage. She had no scandals, no political leanings, no history of exploiting royal privilege. She was, in essence, unspoiled, a blank canvas upon which Charles could paint the next phase of monarchy. And make no mistake, Charles is obsessed with legacy. Those close to him say he often mutters one phrase when discussing long-term plans: "I must leave it better than I found it." It's not about the crown itself, it's about its survival. After decades of watching his mother protect an institution built on tradition, he knows the modern world has no patience for fairy tales. The monarchy needs to evolve, or it will die. That's why he's streamlining the royal family. Fewer titles, fewer working members, fewer scandals. It's about quality over quantity. But there's an irony here. While the king has stripped others of roles and privileges, he's also created one for Lady Louise. Why? Because she represents his vision of the monarchy's future: quiet dignity wrapped in authenticity. She doesn't need to be seen every day, because when she is seen, she means something. Still, that vision didn't emerge overnight. It was born from pain. The fallout from Prince Harry and Meghan's departure left the royal institution reeling. For the first time, the monarchy became the villain in its own story. The king watched helplessly as global audiences sympathized with his son and daughter-in-law, while his own image took a beating. Privately, he blamed himself, not for what happened, but for not seeing it coming. A former royal aide described it bluntly: he realized too late that kindness without strategy is weakness. The Queen had both. Charles only had kindness. That realization hardened him. From that point on, every act of compassion had to serve a purpose. Every gesture had to be layered, emotionally genuine, but politically calculated. That's the environment in which Lady Louise's title was born. Consider this: the Queen's passing left a symbolic vacuum. The image of feminine strength in the royal narrative disappeared. Queen Camilla, though loyal, does not evoke the same warmth or moral authority. Catherine, Princess of Wales, once filled that role beautifully. But with her recent health struggles, her public presence diminished. The monarchy needed a new female figure who could embody grace without controversy, dignity without distance. Someone relatable, trustworthy, and grounded. Charles saw that in Louise. And according to palace insiders, his team had been quietly preparing her for months. She was brought into private briefings on philanthropy, sustainability, and heritage, the king's key policy pillars. She attended private dinners with senior Commonwealth representatives. She was even assigned a discreet mentor within the palace's communications department to coach her on modern public engagement without compromising her privacy. It was all happening in secret, long before the public announcement. Now, some might ask, why the secrecy? Why not prepare her publicly, as William was groomed for years? Because Charles understood that modern trust is built not through spectacle, but through surprise. The public grows weary of overexposure. But when someone appears suddenly, gracefully, with authenticity, it captures attention differently. That was the genius of this plan. The quiet one would emerge exactly when the world least expected it. But there's another side, a darker one. Behind closed doors, some palace insiders suggest that Charles's decision wasn't purely about duty or legacy. They say it was also about control. The king, after all, has long struggled with managing the public perception of his sons. William, though dutiful, is his own man. Harry, defiant and distant, has become unpredictable. By elevating Lady Louise, Charles introduces a new axis of influence, a way to redirect public fascination toward a royal who owes her position entirely to him. It's loyalty insurance, wrapped in ceremony. Royal historian Dr. Malcolm Price put it best. Charles has played a brilliant psychological move. He's reminded the world, and his family, that he alone decides who rises and who falls. He's both honoring his mother and asserting his power. It's a masterstroke of soft authority. And that might be true. But even brilliant moves have consequences. When word of the Queen's letter reached the family, not everyone took it with the reverence Charles did. Princess Anne reportedly questioned whether her mother truly intended for the letter to be acted upon so quickly. She argued that the timing, in the midst of ongoing public scrutiny, might appear opportunistic. Prince Edward, torn between pride and concern, hesitated to voice support. But Charles was unmoved. His tone, according to one insider, was final. "Mother asked. I obey." Yet beneath that stoic exterior, Charles wrestled with something more personal. He admired his mother's devotion, but feared he'd never match her legacy. For 70 years, she defined royalty as service without self. Charles, ever introspective, defines it differently, as duty through reform. To him, elevating Louise wasn't just compliance, it was continuation, a chance to prove he could evolve the monarchy while staying faithful to its core. Still, his advisors warned him. The timing could be read as favoritism. The optics, one aide said, may revive the debate about who deserves titles and who doesn't. Charles paused, then replied quietly, "Optics fade. Legacy doesn't." It's that kind of cold conviction that has reshaped how the palace operates under his rule. Every act now is intentional. Every silence is calculated. Every headline is part of a narrative arc, one that leads to the preservation of the monarchy's relevance. The announcement of Lady Louise's new title fit perfectly into that plan. But here's where things get even more intriguing. The proclamation wasn't just a title grant. It was tied to a broader restructuring of royal duties. A leaked internal memo, circulated within days of the announcement, outlined expanded responsibilities under the Edinburgh Foundation umbrella. The document hinted that Princess Louise would take on initiatives related to youth environmentalism and historical preservation, both deeply connected to the late Queen and Prince Philip's passions. To the outside world, it looked like philanthropy. Inside the palace, however, it was strategy. These were the very causes that once defined the royal family's credibility. Reviving them through a new, relatable figure created a bridge between past and future, between the Queen's moral era and Charles's pragmatic one. It was genius. It was ruthless. It was classic Charles. And yet, there was still something unsettling beneath the surface. Because even as he championed his granddaughter's elevation, the king's tone in private grew increasingly somber. Some close aides began to notice it. The long silences in meetings, the quiet pacing late at night, the way he'd linger over the Queen's handwriting in her old letters. He had carried out her wish, yes, but fulfilling it had stirred something. Guilt, perhaps, or fear that he had unleashed consequences he couldn't yet foresee. One longtime palace butler put it simply. When His Majesty gave Lady Louise her title, he looked proud. But his eyes, they were heavy, like he'd done something both right and irreversible. What was he afraid of? Some believe it was the reaction from other royals. Others think it was something more profound, that the Queen's promise carried implications he hadn't yet revealed to the public. There are whispers, still unconfirmed, that her letter to him contained not just a wish, but a warning, that if the monarchy failed to honor the spirit of service she embodied, it would crumble from within. Charles, ever sensitive to prophecy, took those words seriously. So when he lifted Lady Louise to royal status, it wasn't just a promotion, it was a lifeline. To the Queen's memory, to the crown's future, to his own conscience. But what he didn't expect was that one member of the family, someone he trusted implicitly, would challenge the decision in private, reopening old wounds that the Queen herself had spent decades trying to heal. That confrontation would change everything. Because behind the king's strategic mind lay something even more dangerous, emotion. And when emotion meets power in the royal family, history has shown it never ends quietly. The confrontation came days later, in a closed-door meeting at Windsor. And the royal who stood against him wasn't a tabloid favorite, nor one prone to public rebellion. It was his sister, Princess Anne, and what she said to her brother would shake the fragile unity holding the crown together. But what came next, her letter, her warning, her truth, would leave King Charles questioning whether he had honored their mother's promise or betrayed it entirely. For most of his life, Prince Edward has been the invisible royal, the youngest of the Queen's children, the one who rarely made headlines, rarely made trouble, and rarely demanded attention. Where his siblings carried the burden of expectation or rebellion, Edward carried something else entirely: quiet loyalty. And yet, when King Charles announced that his daughter, Lady Louise, was to become a princess, that loyalty was tested in ways even he never saw coming. Behind the smiling photographs and the polite statements lay a story of conflict. A father torn between pride and fear, a husband caught between tradition and love, and a man forced to choose between supporting his daughter's destiny or protecting her peace. When the king's proclamation reached Bagshot Park, Edward and Sophie were reportedly together, finishing dinner in their private dining room. The phone rang. It was Buckingham Palace. The voice on the other end was measured, formal, and unmistakable. His Majesty would like you and Her Royal Highness to be informed before the public statement is released. Edward froze. His wife, Sophie, looked at him with confusion. Informed of what? She asked. Lady Louise Mountbatten Windsor, the caller continued, is to be styled henceforth as Her Royal Highness Princess Louise of Edinburgh.